What's going on, everybody? Welcome back to the channel. Hope you're all doing well, and thanks so much for taking the time out of your day to click here on another video. And today we're going to be talking about the reboot to the Smurfs franchise for a new generation that is simply titled Smurfs. Directed by Chris Miller and co-directed by Matt Landon, this film stars a slew of big names, including people like Rihanna, John Goodman, Kurt Russell, Zolo Maridueña, Nick Offerman, James Corden, and many, many more. So here we are many years after the release of the Smurf live-action hybrid films that came out when I was younger. I was in my teen years, I want to say, when those films were wrapping up. I think they only did like 2 or 3 of them. I honestly am not sure. I think I only saw the first one, to be honest. And when it comes down to the Smurfs, I have a lot of nostalgic memories around these characters. I used to watch the original cartoon as a kid all the time, the reruns that would play on Boomerang and other channels with my mom, who was a big fan when she was growing up. We even had stuffed Smurfs in the house. And so I definitely have a nostalgic place in my heart when it comes down to these characters and their stories. And so with all that said, I was excited to see a new iteration, though I don't necessarily felt like it was needed. I don't necessarily know that there's kids today that really need the Smurfs, but as somebody who grew up with the Smurfs, I was open to checking out a new film, though I was a little bit concerned based on the trailers. But before we get into my thoughts on the film, let's get into what this film is all about. After Papa Smurf is kidnapped by the evil wizard Rosamel, brother to Gargamel, the classic villain of the Smurfs, Smurfette and a group of other Smurfs, most notably a Smurf named No Name, must work together in search of a Smurf known as Ken, the brother of Papa Smurf, as they work together to try to find where Papa Smurf has been taken. So I'll start this off by saying, like I already mentioned at the very top of the video, that this film is completely stacked with cast members. Of course, if you've seen the poster, the big one that they're pushing is Rihanna, who I will say right here is fine in the film. If you're a fan of Rihanna, sure, I'm sure you'll enjoy it. There's a musical number that she sings in the film that I think is the best use of her in the film, without a doubt. Any moments that she's singing is definitely why I think Rihanna is in this film. As a voice actress, she's fine, but the movie is definitely marketing her heavy as almost the main character of the film, but we're going to get into that in just a little bit because I don't necessarily know if she really is. But outside of her, you also have James Corden as one of the main characters in the film, arguably the main character, as the character of No Name, one Smurf in the mix who doesn't really have his thing. He's not known for a thing the same way that you have other Smurfs like Lazy Smurf or Grouchy Smurf or Brainy Smurf or whatever the case may be. He's the one that doesn't really have anything going for him, and so he's in a lot of ways the audience character, the one that you can definitely relate to the most over the course of the film. But outside of those two actors, you also have Kurt Russell, John Goodman, Zolo Maridueña, Marshmallow's in here, Hannah Waddington, Nick Kroll, Octavia Spencer, Jimmy Kimmel, Sandra Oh. I mean, the list is just stacked. When I saw the cast for this, I was like blown away immediately just from that. And I think for the most part, the entire cast is pretty solid here. It's all a bunch of recognizable voices. You'll be able to be like, oh, look who that is, or oh, I recognize that voice. Even if you don't know who's in this film, your ears are going to start to pick up on who's in this film. And even afterwards, you may even go and check out IMDb and be like, oh, I didn't know that's who played that role, but now I can hear it. So immediately, yeah, the film is stacked with a really strong cast. And I think for the most part, everybody's showing up, giving solid vocal performances. And that's by far the best part of the film. And I'll follow that up by saying that I think the animation for the most part is pretty solid too. It's no DreamWorks or Pixar or Disney animation, but I think for the most part, if you've seen other things that have come from Nickelodeon 3D animation in the modern day, it looks pretty solid for what it is. It's definitely stylized to almost kind of have like an old school look to it that almost made it feel like something that came out in the 2000s, but by no means do I kind of use that as like a negative. I just think it's, you know, competent, solid animation, but by no means top tier animation in the world of what we have with animation today. And similar to those films that came out in the 2000s, this film also has moments that have hybrids with live action, which I will be honest in saying are probably some of the weaker parts of the film. I think the live action segments of this film felt in a lot of ways like an afterthought, whereas in the older films, it was clear they were making live action films that they were going to insert the Smurfs into, whereas here it felt like they just kind of got a bunch of shots that they needed to insert the Smurfs into, but didn't really put a lot of thought into how the humans or the other individuals or the things in the world are reacting to the Smurfs. A lot of times the Smurfs are right in the mix of things and nobody is reacting to them in any way, shape, or form. I know they're supposed to be small, but a lot of times they'll be in a bunch very clearly in a location, and the humans or the other things that are supposed to be reacting to them aren't really reacting to them properly. So I do think that the live action animation hybrid of the film didn't work nearly as well as it did in the older films. And something else I can say about this film immediately is it kind of reminded me of the Trolls films. While I do think the Trolls films are better animated and a little bit more fun to watch, it has a similarity. You follow a group of smaller characters where you have a main character who has kind of lost their way or doesn't really feel like they're as in tune with the rest of their culture or the rest of their group of trolls, or in the case of this one, Smurfs. And so you kind of have like a self-exploration narrative that goes on with a couple of musical numbers throughout the mix that have some moments where our Smurfs, or in the case of those movies, the trolls, are dancing. So yeah, there was definitely a similarities there. I think the Trolls movies are more fun, and I enjoy those films a lot more visually as well, but I couldn't help but see the comparisons. But something that makes this film definitely stand out is that it definitely leans a little bit more into some new lore for the Smurfs. So I think for a new generation, there are new characters that are introduced, not only in the Smurf world, but also with the villains. I'm not overly familiar with all the details, but I remember Gargamel being the main bad guy all the time. And this time around, the main bad guy is actually Razamel, who's the brother of Gargamel. Maybe he's been in previous iterations, I don't know. But in this case, he's the main villain, with Gargamel taking a bit more of a back seat and being more there for comedic relief, and less so because he's the big iconic Smurf villain, which may turn some people off, but I didn't mind Razamel as the villain. Though to be honest, Razamel and Gargamel in this film are pretty interchangeable. They're essentially the same character, and they're actually played by the same voice actor. Now, with all that said, if I'm completely honest, I thought that Smurfs was just fine. I think the film, like I said, is well animated. I think there are elements about it that are fun. There are some solid musical numbers in the film, specifically the one that's sung by Rihanna. I think, of course, she's got a great voice, so add her into an animated film that has some, whimsy and wonder visually, and have her doing her thing. You're gonna have a good time, at least with that. I was talking to one of the critics that I saw the film with after the movie was over. I just said, hey, what'd you think? He goes, I like the music. So I guess that's one thing you can keep in mind. But outside of that, the film just felt okay to me. In a lot of ways, it felt like a couple of ideas that they had for a movie that were kind of jammed together. And I think the beginning has its own through line that kind of connects to the end, but the middle section of the film started to feel a little bit like they were just kind of throwing things at the wall to see what would stick. Sometimes it was fun, sometimes it was funny. I think when this movie is funny and the humor lands, it's a lot of times because of how silly it is or how silly the lines of dialogue are. I'm definitely a sucker for some good, silly kind of slapstick humor. So there were moments in this film that made me laugh, not because I really found it to be funny, just because I thought they were leaning so heavily into dumb. And those moments made me laugh just because I was like, okay, this is just ridiculous. But there were a lot of moments of humor that just flat out fell flat, to be honest. I saw the film in a press screening, but it was one of the press screenings that has public in there as well. So you have the press in reserved rows, but then you had tons of parents with their kids in there as well. And I like to use these kind of screenings as a gauge for how the kids are reacting to the film. A good example is earlier this year, there was the movie Dogman that I thought was just okay. I didn't really love it, but I could totally see why kids would love it. And I got to see the reactions of the kids in the moment, which for the most part seemed like they were all having a really good time. The theater I was in today was also fairly packed with families and a lot of kids, and I didn't really hear a lot of the kids laughing or getting overly excited. I just felt like a lot of the jokes were just not landing with the kids. They weren't landing with me, and there was a lot of silence in the theater outside of some kids crying here or there or just talking to their parents. With that said, though, there were still moments in the film that were very silly or goofy that definitely got a laugh from audiences, both kids and adults, and so I could definitely appreciate that there's going to be some humor that works for people. And there was even some humor on the latter half of the film at the very end that was definitely more adult, that got a lot more laughs in the audience from adults, including myself and the fellow critics I saw it with. I was kind of surprised they snuck those jokes in there near the end, and they're not subtle whatsoever. So I appreciate that they were trying to make an attempt to kind of make it something that kids can enjoy, but also a little bit of something here and there for adults who are taking their kids to go see this movie. With all that said, though, I think narratively this film is just a bit messy and just feels a little bit generic. There isn't really much on a character level that's overly exciting. There isn't much in terms of really expanding the scope of Smurfs that's overly exciting. In a lot of ways, it feels like a reboot that was just kind of done to, have a Smurfs movie, but less so because it felt like an inspired recreation or inspired reboot to kind of really revitalize the franchise for a new generation. I can't really imagine kids watching this film and being blown away by it. And the reason I say that is, as somebody who consumes a lot of media for families, in particular stuff that's for kids, and somebody who still really enjoys those things, it's one of those situations where I see a film like this and I just don't necessarily know that it is up to the same tier or the same level of quality that we see from tons of other films that are for families and kids in the modern day, especially from other big studios like DreamWorks, Disney, or Pixar, that I think for the most part are still knocking it out of the park and creating very resonant stories that are deeper for kids to be able to still understand, but something that parents can take from it as well, and something that has a little bit more of an emotional core. I can't really say I ever felt emotionally connected to this film, and so with that all said, I do think this is a film that's going to work for a much younger audience. I think it's got a lot going on visually. It's got rapid pacing. So if you're looking for something to throw your kids in front of so they can be distracted for an hour and a half, I think this movie will work on that level. But if you're looking for a film that you as an adult are also going to be able to enjoy and feel like, oh, this is a great way to really bond with my kids, I don't necessarily know that this film is going to do that. But I don't think that Smurfs is a bad time either. I think the film is perfectly fine. It's enjoyable enough. The humor is silly and definitely for a younger audience. But again, I didn't necessarily see the kids in my theater clamoring for the humor or anything that was going on in the film. It just felt like the movie came and went and everybody walked out of the theater without there really being much of an excitement that I could hear from the crowd. And if I had to lean into like my biggest gripe with this film outside of the story just kind of being okay and generic and a little bit all over the place, I think the film struggles with who it's trying to focus on. I mentioned before that Smurfette is the main one that's being marketed on all the posters saying Rihanna is Smurfette. They're definitely trying to sell people on that and put Rihanna as the big name in the film, despite the ginormous names that are part of the cast list of this film. But the character of No Name, who's played by James Corden, in a lot of ways is truly the main character. It's his journey. It's him kind of having a self-exploration and figuring out who he is as a Smurf that really is the journey. And Smurfette is kind of there more as like a secondary main character, but at times the film feels like it's trying to make Smurfette the main focus, that it's her journey, and at other moments it feels like the film is truly No Name's. And so who's the main character? I don't really know. I would probably say it's No Name, played by James Corden, but I do think that the film struggled with that at times, which is why I say before that I does feel like there's a couple of Smurf movies in here and it doesn't really always know what it's trying to be. With all that said, I think Smurfs is a perfectly fine time that young kids will enjoy. I'm sure there will be parents that also find it to be enjoyable enough, but in the grand, overwhelming just world that we currently have of film and television on streaming and in theaters, I don't necessarily know that Smurfs is up to the task of being amidst the better things coming out for families or kids. Again, if you have really little ones and you want them to kind of see something that's colorful and vibrant, that has nice messages that they can consume, but you know, is fairly surface level and just something that they can kind of like be distracted by for an hour and a half, there's certainly a movie here that you can throw them in front of. But if you're looking at this as like, oh, I grew up with Smurfs, I want something that kind of feels like it modernizes Smurfs and is up to the same level of a lot of modern animation today, I don't necessarily know that you're going to get that. I think ultimately this is a film that was just okay at best, and I'll probably never watch it again. But if they make a sequel, because I do this, I'll probably see that. So that's going to be my thoughts on Smurfs, and I'm looking forward to hearing what you guys have to say. Are you planning on checking this out with the family? Are you going to take your kids to check it out? If you already saw it, what did you think about it? Whatever the case may be, leave any and all comments down below, and I'll see you beautiful people in the next one. Bye-bye.